Todd Landman. I'm a professor of political science at University of Nottingham, Pro-Vice Chancellor at the Faculty of Social Sciences, and Executive Director of the Rights Lab. For about the last 25 years or so, I've been working on quantitative analysis of human rights problems, and have turned my attention recently to the issue of modern slavery. And I run a podcast called The Rights Track, and the last two series we've been specifically focusing on discussions of analyzing and combating modern slavery. It's a real pleasure to welcome the panel here. We're still waiting for Harry Cook to join us, but that will allow him just to come up while I'm making these introductory remarks. So it's a pleasure to welcome everyone here in New York. And I think what we confront and what I listened to in the first set of presentations is what data scientists and methodologists called the fundamental problem of unobservability. The fundamental problem that faces us is really a hard-to-find population where I think that computational science and artificial intelligence can really add a new dimension to the ways in which we do that work. And I'd like to join Kevin in also recognizing the work of HR DAG, because they've been doing this hard-to-find population work for a really, really long time. And I note the work not only on truth commissions that they've done for many, many years, but also work on Syria for the United Nations and looking at how many people had died in the conflict in Syria. And equally, their work on Mexico, looking using AI and machine learning to map mass graves across the counties of Mexico, using data that they knew about to say something about data that they did not know about. Now, our program today is quite condensed. We have a very short period of time for each of our presenters. My calculation is about 4 minutes each, which is pretty harsh. But that leaves a little bit of time for Q&A before the next session. And we have 8 speakers, and I'm going to proceed in the order in which they're listed on my program. Their details are all on your program on the website, so you will know who they are, their affiliations, and the work that they've been doing. But we have a great selection of presentations this morning. This is titled a showcase, so it's a bit of a shop window on what people are doing today and how they're using computational science and AI to address the problem of modern slavery. And I'll allow each of our speakers to summarize the work that they're doing. This will then allow you to really think about which of the mini hothouses you'd like to attend. And as rapporteurs, we'll all report back on those sessions anyway, so you can just go to the session that you do like. And of course, we'll report back tomorrow on the proceedings. So without further ado, I want to introduce our first speaker, who's going to be talking about analyzing ODA using machine learning, and that's Kelly Gleason from Delta 8.7.
Thanks, Todd. It's a neat little robo-clicker. I just want to make sure yeah, there we go. Great to be here. I'm really happy to see everyone, and happy to have the opportunity to showcase some data collection and analysis I conducted as part of a report James and I put out this last year on tracking official development assistance flowing to anti-slavery and anti-child labor programs. So the empirical approach used for this analysis provides a good example of the utility in combining subject matter expertise with even simple automation techniques to get better, faster results, which I believe is a big reason we're all here today. So to begin, the issue we wanted to investigate, or issues, were as follows. How much aid is flowing to target 8.7 issues? Which countries were making these commitments? Where those commitments were going, and to what issues they were focused on. The analysis was guided by a prior study in which the author compiled a database by hand using a variety of qualitative and quantitative sources to size up average aid spending on modern slavery issues for 12 countries over a 13-year period. So quite a remarkable first start, and a great deal of work to put all of that together. So here are some of the issues with this original approach. The amount of time, effort, and resources required to get the data together is clearly significant. And still, the data was somewhat limited in granularity, showing no variation over time or between forms of exploitation. Though a wealth of data exists in the OECD's Creditor Reporting System database, where info on official development assistance is stored, but it's tough to work with. The codes were not designed to measure target 8.7 issues, though there are some codes involved, nor were they sort of set up to measure any of the SDGs. Fortunately, what the database does have is a deep reservoir of rarely tapped textual data in the form of program descriptions. Sifting through and reading all of these program descriptions to find the ones related to Target 8.7 is extremely time-consuming and costly. So this is where computer automation can save the day. So to select the right programs for sample inclusion, I used a simple form of natural language processing. I began by pre-processing the data using a system of predefined rules based on word stems and tokenization. So this was refined many times. There was certainly a human element involved and research assistants that worked very hard on this. We had to really capture all the relevant terms used to describe various forms of exploitation in multiple language. The algorithm was used to then detect co-occurrences with other relevant text. For example, to pick up trafficking or the stem traffic. If we also picked up then drug trafficking, it will be dropped as a false positive. The method used for this analysis was simpler than other language processing because the ODA project descriptions are really well structured, and we only needed to focus on the syntax and not really the semantics. So I'm going to go through the findings really quickly, though the reports are on all of your chairs. So I'm going to breeze past some very neat graphs, but if anyone wants to talk to me about graphs later or anytime, literally ever, please let me know. So let me start by saying, first, the data showed us that commitments to Target 8.7 issues are gradually increasing, or had been between 2000 and 2013, and they totaled over 4 billion. Go right to expenditures. So we found no relationship between the size of aid commitments to slavery and the size of overall ODA commitments that a country gives, suggesting countries prioritize aid to anti-slavery programming differently from one another. Go right by. On recipient patterns, and I know it's small, but again, it's in your report. The majority of direct bilateral aid committed was focused on a handful of recipient countries, but widely dispersed over many countries along down the tail in smaller grants. So now zeroing in on this top group, so OECD countries prioritize recipients differently, displayed here in the distance between amounts recipients received between the US in the gold and other OECD countries in the purple. Finally, we found trends in the way aid was committed to forms of exploitation over time. Child labor programming, which you can see in the blue bars, became outpaced by programming targeting human trafficking, which you can see in the dark gray bars, gradually over time as well. So, fast. In conclusion, the findings generated by automating the data collection and sorting process added much to what we know about aid to anti-slavery efforts. But there's much more to learn, of course. Future efforts to refine the model by using various modeling strategies are being considered as we work toward gathering more recent years of data. Natural language processing can also be used to collect data related to private giving and aid flows outside of just the ODA database that we currently have. By automating the data gathering process, massive amounts of time and effort were saved. Cutting down on time and cost of research is essential in ensuring that we can deliver results in a timely enough manner for our findings to be meaningful and actionable. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Louise.
Remote control? Well, good morning, everybody. Really nice to be here to receive your inputs and feedbacks about the issues we're going to talk about later on today with more details. Well, in Brazil, we're going to talk about what we're doing in our prosecution agency there, the Federal Labor Prosecution Office. In Brazil, prosecutors, in addition to the traditional prosecution business, we monitor the effectiveness of decent work policies in general. And the context is the policy making there is mostly rhetoric oriented. I mean, it's not that evidence-based at all, mostly in relation to human trafficking, commercial sexual exploitation, forced labor, modern slavery, all of these issues. And so 2 years ago, we realized that we needed to build a knowledge base to better inform the policymaking process. We needed a data-driven approach to counter trafficking policies mostly. So we started this what we call SmartLab initiative, which is basically, in a nutshell, a data for good project to mine government data focusing on the target 8.7 mostly. So we started by the creation of a data lake to store the databases, focusing on cases. I mean, prosecution case management databases, judiciary case management databases, police case management databases, etc., and focusing on vulnerabilities. And we're going to talk about some of the databases we've collected later on today during the hot house sessions, right? And, well, basically our idea was to transform data into a policymaking knowledge base to foster transparency, accountability, and social control. And interestingly, in Brazil, accountability is not, we don't have a word to translate accountability into Portuguese, unfortunately. So this is a very important issue there. When you have to explain to someone how to hold someone accountable, you have to use a word like accountability. You don't have a word in Portuguese for that. Okay, well, and we're using, importantly, open source technologies and open data formats. We're not, spending a lot of money to do what we're doing. We're partnering with the ILO, government agencies, NGOs, sort of trying to develop a win-win game for all of the participants. I'm going to describe later on today. Okay, so raw data was transformed into readily available information and knowledge. We developed data-driven applications to put information out there, to create new information flows. We've created 5 digital observatories, one of them concerning human trafficking. We're investing a lot on data visualization and storytelling to, not only showing a chart, but explaining what does that mean and what are the questions that we set out to address when we're presenting information on that chart specifically. And we're sort of trying to use meaningful units of analysis, municipalities, individuals, profiles, the profile of the trafficker, of the perpetrator, of the victim, not only, issuing in reports with aggregate numbers, because they're useless in terms of deploying policy making at the local level, right? So we wanted to empower public and private stakeholders with information and explore new possibilities using, of course, machine learning mostly to predict risks and to improve resource allocation. I'm going to show you some examples later on today. So to predict risk and to improve resource allocation, we are using a lot of information concerning places where victims were rescued. We're not focusing on the cases, only the cases, the traditional approach, which is focusing on the cases, the law enforcement cases. We're focusing on the vulnerabilities at the human development level. I mean, what are the locations where the victims were born? Vulnerabilities at the socioeconomic level, the locations where the victims were. Oh, I forgot to change the slide. Sorry. Okay, the locations where the victims lived with their families, the profile of the victims and traffickers and perpetrators, variables concerning supply and demand, etc. And then we started to deploy the databases into data-driven applications, online public reports. On your top left, you see one of our observatories, the first version. We have a new version now, focusing on this storytelling platform I've alluded to. I can show you later on today. And we have, the automated reports for 5,500 municipalities where unfortunately most governments don't know what they're doing work a lot of the time. And we've collected hundreds of indicators that, are meaningful for them to make their decisions. So it's everything online and publicly available. Now we have this new storytelling platform. In the, at the top of the screen, you will see that the charts didn't have explanations. But now every chart that we present, we have an explanation for the chart. It's like a Twitter explanation. It's just a little bit of words, not to overwhelm the people that are reading the reports. Some of the, I'm almost finishing. So we have a lot of examples of impact. We've seen lots of meetings like that one where multi-stakeholder agreements were discussed to improve policies in place considering this evidence-based approach. On that picture there, it was the first settlement agreement we managed to achieve with the state governor. As soon as he realized that his state was one of the worst hotspots in terms of prevalence of human trafficking. We've managed to, to reach out to the media outlets, and they're using the observatory to talk about trafficking policies, not only in one given day, but every single day, where they find a reason to look for information related to the things that they want to set on the public agenda. We're developing multiple approaches. As I told you, we're not focusing on only the cases where the victims were rescued. We're focusing on, for example, the places where they were born and with the places where they were rescued. So to track vulnerabilities. There you see Secretary of Human Rights of the state of Maranhão, and he is focusing on the data that he collected from the observatory to discuss with NGOs at the local level what they should be doing. Sorry, so sorry. I get so emotional when I'm talking about this. Really sorry. Oh, all wet. So we're investing not only on case-oriented interventions, but in interventions focusing on vulnerabilities that we might track using our platform. And there you see a congressman using the data on a congressional hearing. And this is the end of my presentation. We're gonna... Thank you very much. We're going to talk more later on today. Thank you very much.
Is it this button? That would be logical. Hi, my name is Dominique Roe-Sepowitz. I'm an associate professor in social work at Arizona State University. I'm here because of Nadia Bliss, who is amazing, and I feel really lucky to be here. I have a small research office on, it's called the Office of Sex Trafficking Intervention Research, and we're a bit of a dynamic research office. We have a housing program for sex trafficked women and their children in Phoenix, the first HUD housing program in the United States that directly brings people from our community into a housing program with a therapeutic overlay, and we do everything from Zen shiatsu to having a chef come in and teach cooking and really trying to create a safe, warm community, to being an expert with the MEMEX program and helping to develop using truth sets from online data of ads of children to try to find children who are being trafficked around the world. So our skill set is quite varied. We have students from all over the university working on this. And I want to present to you today some data that I have worked with very hard to get from the Las Vegas Police Department. It took us many years to gain their trust. They're an interesting organization, but it's also really the touch point of sex trafficking in the United States. People go to New Orleans to get drunk and do fun things, but people go to to Las Vegas to buy sex. And so we're trying to figure out how to message that differently. It is not legal to buy sex in Las Vegas, but also how are people getting there? How are people being brought there? What does the money look like? How are things transacting? How are people being advertised now that Backpage is down? And really trying to be nimble in our work to give the prosecutors and law enforcement enough information to make police decisions using data. So they had no idea what we were talking about when we approached them. They said researchers are kind of a pain in the ass, and we really just want to get our job done, and you're going to be interference. And all their work is in paper. They don't put their cases online for 3 years for lots of reasons. So we have to do a lot of learning that way. So this is police data on one case that we saw, and what I want you to think about is all the decisions that are made technology-wise using this data. So these are catch points where we could prevent the trafficking. These are decision points where we could look for patterns. So this is about a young girl named Q. She's 15. She's living in a group home in Louisiana. She was removed from her family because her stepfather was abusing her, and her mother kicked her out. She told a counselor at school and is now in the child welfare system. So the first decision point is she's in a child welfare system list. She goes to a new school. She gets a phone because of our laws in the United States that we want kids who are in care to have normal lives, so we allow them to have access to technology. And she's looking through Instagram, and along with this picture of a guy standing in front of a Bentley and two women, there are key points like 304, which is the word hoe spelled backwards, or 304 life, or RHGO, which is real hoeing going on. She doesn't know what those mean. She sees the Bentley and the stack of money and the two girls and something that looks like a lot of fun. So she likes it. She says this looks cool, and instantly the top girl in the stable of trafficked people texts her, DMs her, and says, "We're having so much fun. You should join us." And she says, "Sounds great." So almost immediately, they buy her a ticket on a Greyhound bus using the Visa card of the bottom. So it's not the trafficker, it's his bottom. Her private, debit card, it's a real Visa, it's a real debit card. And she goes on a 42-hour Greyhound bus ride. On Greyhound, you don't have to register your name. You just get a code. You can buy a ticket for anyone in the country at any age and put them on a bus without any identification needed. So she had a 6-digit code, and she was able to travel 42 hours across the country. She's 15. So she gets there, and they buy some Visa cards at the Circle K, and they buy her some clothes and some condoms, and they post her for $14 on a website called BedPage. So suddenly Louisiana figures out she's missing, so she's registered on the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They try to figure out where she is. She does have that phone number, remember. So they use more credit cards, they rent hotel rooms, they're ripping off some of their customers, things are happening. She goes to a casino, she gets trespassed, but she has a fake ID, so she's trespassed under the wrong name. Another list, another decision point where they didn't catch her. So she's running around. During that time, she has sold sex to 36 men. 2 weeks she was out. She was forced to give oral sex 26 times and have full sex 10 times. And she was a virgin when she arrived in Las Vegas. So what do? How do we see her? Finally, the Las Vegas Police Department identifies her during a sting, and they figure out her real age before they put her into the adult jail, which is where they were heading first. So I want you to think about all those touch points, all those places, bank accounts, visas, Greyhound, missing and exploited lists, child welfare lists. Where are the places that we can find this before they get rescued, right? How can we do this as they're being trafficked and not just start at the exit point? How can we use those for prevention? So we've tried to look, we've collected data on the different banking of traffickers, which is fantastic because their banking is a box under their stairs. We have found that they don't put huge amounts into their bank. They don't take predictable amounts out. So that's not very helpful. So we have to find other places where these lists lie to get our patterns. So I'm here for the next 2 days. I am not in another session, but I'm very happy to talk about the practicality of our exiting programs and the services that we provide, the focus groups we do, the survivors from around the country, the innovation. I have a new study that we're looking at trick rolls. Those are robberies of buyers. It's a great way to learn about buyers in a community, but it also really tells us that sex trafficking in our country is not just about selling sex. It's about robbing people as part of that. So the other criminal behavior needs to be included. And our study in Las Vegas a couple weeks ago said in one 12-month period, it was $4.5 million stolen. So think about the implications of that maybe instead of just the value of that human being. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Todd. Sorry, that's the clicker. Okay, morning. I'm Doreen Boyd from the Rights Lab. You've heard a lot from the Rights Lab this morning already, so I won't say any more than that. But I will say that this introduction is to the hothouse called Slavery from Space. And what this is all about, basically, is seeing how we can exploit for meeting the Sustainable Development Goal 8.7, that particular target, exploiting the remotely sensed data that are collected routinely now by satellites orbiting our Earth surface, but also being collected by unmanned aerial vehicles as well. So there are three sort of main ways in which I believe that we can exploit these big data for looking at modern slavery. The first is we can do it via sort of fat truthing. And Kevin Bales has already talked about the sorts of work that we're doing. And what I mean by fat truthing is basically using the satellite data to look at a particular instance of modern slavery that we know about, but to gain more information about that particular instance. The second way is to gap fill. So to use satellite data to give us more information that will fill a data gap that we know that we have a gap in. So the brick kiln example that Kevin talked about is one example there. And the third way is, well, we've got all this big data being collected. how do we use it to tell us about modern slavery instances and prevalence that we don't know anything about? And that to me is really, really exciting. So just to be clear, I'm not saying that we'll use satellite data or drone data to look at slaves per se, but what we can do is use the satellite data and the drone data to tell us where slavery may well be happening. And within the lab, we feel that if we look at the 40 million estimate of modern slavery that we have from the ILO, and you break that down into the different types of slavery, we reckon we can detect probably around a third of that 40 million from space. We've only started to do it, so we've got some way to go. But if we think about that 9,000 a day, then that puts us in a good place to do this. And the Slavery from Space project and the concept of slavery from space is there to allow us to drill down deeper to the micro level rather than the macro level in terms of looking at slavery prevalence. So Kevin already presented some work that we've been doing around the brick kilns, and this is a really good example for us to show what can be done. And we've done it in a number of stages. We can see from the slides there that the kilns are very evident from space. This is high resolution data that is available on Google Earth, for example. So the first thing we did was use statistical estimates, statistical inference to count how many brick kilns there were, because we simply didn't know across the brick belt of South Asia. We then built on that with citizen science, but probably more powerfully, we built on that using machine learning. So we are now in a position where we have all of the brick belts mapped right across this, the brick kilns mapped right across this brick belt region. We also have not just high resolution data where you can see the kiln very, very easily. We also have big data going back nearly 50 years that's been collected from satellite data. And what we've started to do there is for every kiln across the brick belt that we've mapped, we can actually age the kiln, and we can actually see when the kilns were active. And again, that gives us a different narrative and a different perspective on what's happening with regards to the use of bonded labour in these kilns. And then we can also use satellite data through technical innovation. In this particular example, it's from the satellite company Planet. And we can look at what's happening going, in real time, if you like, in terms of, in this particular example, the brick kilns in Bihar, India. And if we go forward, we can see the flooding that's happening in the kilns as a result of the monsoon season. So that tells us, what might happen with regards to use of forced labour in the kiln, and then what more widely than that, what does that mean for the agricultural regions in this particular area, where climate change may well be forcing people into the cities and maybe into the kilns? So I invite you to come along to the hothouse, Slavery from Space, to ask the question how we can optimally use these data. And also, is space the final frontier for 8.7? And join my two colleagues, Austin Cheryl Fitzpatrick and Andrew Zoli from Planet, where we ask that question and hopefully provide some answers.
Harry?
For me? I'm going to stand if that's okay. So my name's Harry Cook. I work for the International Organization for Migration. For those of you who don't know us, we're the UN's migration agency. And I'm going to talk to you about a project that we've been working on for 2 to 3 years now, actually. First of all, I just wanted to illustrate something about the information gap that exists in this field. You're going to hear a lot, and I mean, that's all why we're here, about the lack of evidence, information, and data to effectively combat these kinds of crimes. But I would put to you that actually, while there is a lack of evidence and information for sure, there is actually an abundance of data around, held in different organizations, in different formats, who are working to combat this problem. And that was kind of the starting point for the project, since we're one of those organizations. But all too often, these data can't really be put to use effectively for a range of different reasons. A lot of it is because it's from identified cases. So there's a range of different civil liberties and privacy concerns in using the information. The databases are dispersed and disconnected from each other and quite different. Data are not comparable or standardized either for some of those reasons as well. And there's a lack of technical resources to actually put the data to use. And hopefully that's something that we can kind of work on together. But most actors, for example, providing assistance to victims, survivors, are not going to be able to invest in this sort of technology all the time. So just to give you a bit of context, we assist 7,000 to 8,000 victims every year across the world, and we're the largest actor in that respect. Of that, about 5,000 cases each year go into our central case management database, which is the largest of its kind in the world. It's about 55,000 cases. So we come in at different points along the chain, either from the time of identification, provision of immediate assistance, provision of return and reintegration, usually to the person's country of origin, and sort of the long-term follow-up with that case over a number of years, for example. And that depends on the capacity of the local actors if we do all of those or not. But through that process, we have a lot of quite interesting, data that's really useful to shine a lens on trafficking. So different types of location data, industries and sectors of exploitation, how people actually come to be recruited or controlled, some data on perpetrators as well, and of course the demographics of the background of the persons involved as well. So we're not the only organization, as I mentioned at the beginning. There are, I think, increasingly many organizations that have this type of data available. So this project, we worked initially with Polaris, then also with Liberty Shared. Polaris, you may know, run the US National Hotline for reporting cases of trafficking. Liberty Shared provides case management systems to NGOs in East and Southeast Asia. And together we pooled our available data into a single data set and came up with an open data platform and an open data model to show to basically ensure that data gets to the widest possible audience as part of the natural life cycle of the data. So if we can go to the site, please. So I was told I could demo a live website, but ironically it's a bit tricky. But vicariously with the help of Ben, I think, yeah, thank you, we should be able to do it. So luckily, thank you to James and the organizers. This will be in the Hot House session, I think, next or in the next session, so I'll show you a lot more detail then. But this, and also I think we have a session tomorrow also on standards and governance, so I'll be able to go more into the process there. But just quickly, this is the home page, which, if you can just scroll down, just has different kinds of, sort of factoids, as it were, about that we've gleaned from the data set. If you can go to the next tab, sorry, the map, that's another big component that we're trying to build out now. So if you click on Poland, for example, these orange dots and green dots, sort of from country of origin and country of destination perspective, or country of exploitation. So if you could click on Poland's green dot, for example, this will show you kind of the demographics and background of people that have been exploited in Poland and where they've come from, some of the main countries of origin. If we could go to the next tab. Sorry, the one after. This is the other kind of format that we have, which is kind of part blog, part dashboard. This is looking specifically at males and boys trafficked into sexual exploitation. If you could stop here quickly. You can see immediately that, so this is a sector that we really didn't have much data on before. You can see the stark difference in age between all of those trafficked for sexual exploitation versus just men and boys. And if you go down a little bit more, scroll down slightly more, sorry. Here, this chart, you can really see the distribution is much more over to the top than on the left-hand side than it is on the right. So this is just an example. I mean, this format's quite nice for publishing things quite quickly. That's something we've released in the last couple of months. That's something that caseworkers on the ground have a good idea of, but it's not something that we really knew would hold across the 3 agencies' data. It's also something that we're not able to get really through household surveys. Collecting data on, well, sexual exploitation, but also from children is very difficult. So I'll stop there because I think I have to. And but yeah, happy to go into this in more detail over the coming days.
Thank you. And remote, please. Remote. Thank you. James?
Hi there, I'm going to stand up as well because I'm another academic from the University of Nottingham and I'm used to teaching students, so unless I stand up I feel like everyone's going to fall asleep. So I'm going to keep going here. So I'm going to talk about vulnerability mapping in our hothouse session, so I'm going to keep this short, make a bit of a teaser. And I'm going to talk about how we use machine learning and big data to try and make a dent into risk modeling, but at a local level, not a national level, at quite a hyper-local level in Tanzania. So I'm going to be talking a lot about Tanzania. And also Dar es Salaam, which is seeing rapid urbanization, so lack of knowledge, huge amount of people flooding in. Essentially, the city is now 70% slum, and we have no idea what's going on. But what we do know from quality research is there are a lot of issues relating to 8.7 occurring in the city. So not in rural areas, but actually in the slums. And pretty much all the data is hidden at the moment, very little information about it. So we're going to talk about 2 key points if you come to the session. One is the key issue about lack of evidence, lack of incidents of slavery in these areas, which is a real problem for us because it's hidden data sets. So how can you apply machine learning when you've got no ground truth labels? But also about the lack of information about the drivers behind it and whether we can use new data sources to try and infer that information. In a way very similar to what Kevin was talking earlier about epidemiology and John Snow and looking at cholera. So it's a little bit of a call to arms to the machine learning community. I've got a mixed background, social sciences, and then a PhD in machine learning, so a strange combination. And I want to bring everyone's attention to these 3 things, which kind of come from our data program, which Doreen leads, which are how AI can help not just with analysis, but with data capture, data augmentation, upsampling, multiple systems estimation, trying to find information in a probabilistic manner that will fill this gap of missing hidden data. Then move on to data proxies, these other data streams, really rich big data like mobile phone communications or drone imagery that can start giving us virtual accounts for those ground truths we can find. And finally, bringing it all together in a form of data analysis using AI techniques so we can start modeling what is going on at local levels. Part of that is I'll be talking about getting those ground truths. So surveys we've run in Tanzania with local communities, so a big aspect of local communities engaging in the projects, using new techniques. This is comparative judgment, a statistical technique, but also on the ground surveys to get these ground truths before we extend it out. So if you're interested in those sort of things, please come to this session. We'll also be talking about big data. You know it's big data because it's neon blue and 1 zeros. But underneath it, there is real data sets that we're using and trying to look at for the first time. So anonymized cell tower patterns to see if we can see incidents in mobility and poverty and so on. These demographic information we're trying to correlate across that reveal different behaviors, but also combining that with the features we can extract from drone imagery to try and come together in one sort of encompassing model that gives us just some iterative insights into this quite pernicious problem. And hopefully, not just try and solve and release 9,000 people, but prevent new ones moving in. Because we've also got to do that. It's not just about releasing the people that are there now, but stopping the next generation. Okay, I've kept that pretty quick to keep us on time. So.
Good morning, and last but not least, it's a huge privilege to be here. I'm Chris Cuthbert from the Lumos Foundation, an international NGO formed by Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling and focused on children in orphanages and children's rights to family life. While colleagues at the back are teeing up a short film, I will just say a very brief few words about our hothouse session. this afternoon. We'll be talking about orphanage trafficking. This is a very old phenomenon, but an incredibly new area for research and investigation. And as James said this morning, we are absolutely thrilled to be here because of the breadth of knowledge, learning, expertise in the room. We really want your help, your ideas in this new field of inquiry, to help in a generative session, in a very generative discussion, to help us understand how orphanage trafficking can be defined and operationalized in practice in really complex local settings on the ground. But we also think there's lots of opportunity for computational science to help us understand hotspots, where there may be concentrations of unregistered orphanages, where there may be flows of money coming from the developed world, and where there may be concentrations of volunteers, indicators which are all suggestive of trafficking patterns. So please do join us at 3:15 for our hot house. We really do want your input and ideas. And finally, I'll just show you a short film which will give you a little bit more of a flavour of what orphanage trafficking is about.
Millions of children around the world live in orphanages, but 80% are not orphans, according to Lumos, the charity set up by J.K. Rowling. Many have been taken from their parents. Traffickers have worked out that orphanages are good business, attracting large donations from well-meaning individuals and organizations. From Nepal to Haiti and India to Uganda, the number of orphanages across the developing world has mushroomed. Experts say many orphanages are a hidden form of modern-day slavery. Traffickers often dupe parents with promises their children will be educated and return home to lift them out of poverty. Some even target poor pregnant women, offering to pay their medical costs in return for their babies when they give birth. Disasters like the massive earthquakes in Nepal and Haiti only make the situation worse. Orphanages, even well-run ones, are bad for children. They're cut off from their families, friends and communities. Abuses are common. Children may be beaten, sexually abused, starved or re-trafficked. Parents of children with disabilities may be promised they will receive medical care, but horrific abuses have recently been uncovered in orphanages in Guatemala. Some children were tied to wheelchairs, metal railings and even held in cages. The UN Children's Agency, UNICEF, says placing a child in an orphanage quadruples the risk of sexual violence. Some organizations, like Forget Me Not, are helping to rescue children from these institutions, but they also have a broader aim: to end the orphanage business for good. They want to develop community-based services to enable all children to live with their families. There are calls for there to be no more children living in orphanages anywhere in the world by 2050. But with 8 million youngsters currently living in these institutions, how feasible is this?
Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. So I'm conscious of time. The session is nearly finished. And I just want to say thanks to the panelists for keeping the time and a rapid set of presentations to give you an idea of the sorts of issues that we're facing. I think there's some common themes emerging already, which I'd like you to keep in mind when you go to the hothouse sessions. The first is there's no absence of human element here. That you know, machine learning only goes as far as the human element teaches it, and actually the preliminary steps all seem to be done through a human inspiration, human imagination to ask the machine to do something. Second would be that we're using data sources that haven't been tapped before, or combining data sources that haven't been combined before in really imaginative ways for good. The third was this sense of Dominique raised about decision points and touch points and pathways and networks, the complexity of human interactions that can now be mapped and analyzed in ways that haven't been looked at before. The fourth area for me is really around the quality of sample information and the strength of the inferences that you make from analyzing those samples. There's a lot of selection bias. There's a lot of convenience sampling going on here. even in case-based management databases, drawing inferences about age differences and demographic differences is actually quite suspect from the sorts of cases that are being reported through legal mechanisms, for example. And finally, I think the big insight was the storytelling from Brazil. I like this idea that data only tells you so much, and sometimes data visualization can be so complex that you actually need a bit of text and a story and to make sense of it all, and that sense making is a really important part of what we're all here for today. So on behalf of the panel and the organizers, I wanted to thank everyone for presenting and for the audience for taking part and listening, and we're moving now to the hot house session. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Just on housekeeping on time, thank you for sticking to time. We are a little bit late. We will take 10, 15 minutes for coffee. I know you probably want to grab some caffeine, use a restroom. We'll start at 1:15 the hour. I'd ask the moderators to do their best to make up the time in the session or just run a little bit into lunch. This room, if it's not clear, is Greeno, and the room next door is Sutton. If you want to know which hothouse to go to, please look at your agenda and select yourselves into those samples accordingly. Thank you very much.